What's going on, everyone? Hopefully you're all excited because we have the biggest video to date on the channel today. We're going to be talking about every single leader and ranking them, basically doing the full deck meta tier list for Star Wars Unlimited for set 3. In these videos, I basically just rate every single leader in their best archetypes, and in some cases, there's multiple meta options for that leader. And so we got to talk about all the potential from set 1, set 2, and now including the leaders from set 3. So we have a ton of leaders to talk about at this point, which means the video is just getting longer and longer every single time, and a lot of stuff to cover. Now, of course, this is initial impressions. This is heavily based on, not only set 2 meta, but also the set 3 initial meta from the tournaments. And we won't truly see what the meta is actually like until the planetary qualifiers end up showing up, because we didn't see what set 2 was going to develop until the planetary qualifiers actually popped off. So just keep that in your brain and take this list with a grain of salt. It is, of course, a subjective list, and everyone's going to have different opinions. So let me know what you think about all the leaders and what we're going to talk about today, or if I'm missing any. Again, I mentioned we're going to talk about every single leader, and we're going to have at least one archetype for that leader, but there are some leaders that are going to have 2, 3, or even 4 different decks with the color combinations available in Star Wars Unlimited that we got to talk about. And so before we do, let's dive into the tiers and talk about that. And also a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, guys. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for sticking with me, and thank you for chatting in the Discord. It's been a ton of fun. And also I have a TCG player link in the description down below if you want to pick up any of these set 3 leaders or even the showcases, which I have exhibited today. We're also going to have the leader, the normal version of it, hopefully posted on screen as I talk about each one of these leaders. So let's dive into it, starting us off with starting us off with the tiers first, not Dr. Aphra. So we're gonna go bottom from top today. We got the LOL tier, a little bit of a new tier added. Of course, Boba Fett's gonna be in there because, wow, he got banned, lol. But we're also going to be dropping, honestly, the list that I just absolutely atrociously hate, because they're just so atrociously bad that they should get banned, to be honest. They're just a blight on leaders, and they can't even be in another tier with other people, okay? They're just that bad. D tier, these are ones that I don't have that vitriol for, okay? They have maybe some redeeming quality, but to be honest, they are pretty bad too. Their leader ability just doesn't do anything. They flip for terrible stats. They have such a high cost, whatever it is. These are leaders that are pretty bad as well, and can honestly probably be in the lull tier 2. C tier, these are leaders that actually have a redeeming quality. Maybe they have something that could work in set 3, some sort of potential niche scenario where they actually do something decent, but overall pretty weak in power level, or maybe have some sort of leader above them that kind of fits their style but just does it better. B tier leaders, these are going to be leaders that actually can show up and pick off a store showdown, a weekly tournament, amateur tournament, whatever, actually do well. They just don't quite have either the firepower or the consistency, or maybe they have some poor matchups against some of the higher tier decks that really push them a little bit further down in the meta. A tier lists, these are going to be the list that if you're trying to be a competitive player, A and S tier lists are going to be the list that you're wanting to test against, play as, see how the deck functions, or maybe even play yourself bringing to a tournament. I wouldn't fault you if you're being competitive and you're like, hey, I'm going to go with an A tier list because I know it better, because you still have a very, very good competitive viability with some of these lists. And, well, as we saw in like planetary qualifiers, which are going to be the determinant meta kind of data, well, we saw things like Ray Red in there, or things like, in the random cases, like Kylo Yellow show up a couple times. These lists that are a little bit outside of the absolute meta, but still very, very solid decks that you actually can see show up multiple times in these top finishes. And then, of course, the S tier. I mean, this is just the cream of the crop, right? These are going to be your Boba Fett's of set 3. These are going to be the decks that you have to think about. And if you cannot compete against, your deck's probably like a B tier or C tier, period. You need to be able to function against these decks. You need to be able to have a good chance at beating them, or in most cases, you're not going to have a good chance at beating them because they're going to be the best deck. So at least have a reasonable shot at beating them in order to even consider this deck to be solid in general. But let's start us off with Dr. Aphra. All right, everyone, with a new tier added and a bunch of new leaders added to the list, as well as multiple options for some of those leaders, we got to be a little bit more harsh, and that means that Dr. Aphra is going to start off in C tier. Maybe this is surprising to you, but I do think she does have that one redeeming quality that I said that C tier leaders could pop up in, and that is she is a monster against very, very hard control decks. And we did see that in set 2, where Dr. Aphra would show up, and this restock / bounty hunter crew / discard cycling that Dr. Aphra does is just really tough for actual hard control decks to function against. Because the whole idea of this deck is to kind of get rid of your deck so that you can cycle to these really good cards. But against most decks, you're not going to be able to do that because you're going to die. You're going to get 30 HP on your base, and you're going to be really sad. But against those hard control decks, you actually can function, and that's what Aphra is going to get for her C tier redeeming quality. Next one up, we got Boba Fett, that is. Guys, if he was in the meta, I would just straight up put literally these 4 lists like S and A tier. The same shell that you're seeing with some of the other decks in the meta right now, like Django Red, for example, is very similar to the Boba Red that we'll be seeing. Double Yellow Boba was still exceptionally strong, and so was Boba Green. The same kind of synergy still exist within the deck, and the deck is still extremely good. If you start playtesting some of the set 3 decks, some of these decks were the decks that I playtested against initially because they were the best decks, and I still do to this day because Boba Fett's still an extremely powerful leader. It's just that he's banned. Let's get him down in the lull tier. Let's go, guys. Boba Fett is still exceptional, and if you do really want to run your deck through the gauntlet, I definitely recommend going ahead and testing against some of these Boba decks because they are extremely powerful still. Next up, we've got one of my more favorite, I guess you'd say not underrated, but weaker leaders, and that is Bo-Katan. We got Bo-Katan Blue and Bo-Katan Red here, which is kind of cool. We didn't really get all that many Mandalorians from set 3. We did get that kind of cool Satine Kryze, Duchess's Champion option. We have Bo-Katan unit, but unfortunately those aren't heroism, or Bo-Katan's not a heroism unit, and Duchess's Champion is a double blue unit, which makes so you really can't play it, and Satine doesn't fit the theme. You got Sabine Wren, which is a cunning unit and doesn't really fit Bo-Katan in general. I would have to say comparatively to the other options, which is double red Bo-Katan and then double red Bo-Katan. Double red actually did do some work in set 2 a little bit, and blue red is definitely the deck that I found to be a little bit better, just because you have more options to multiple different Mandalorians where you can really rely on this 1 damage trigger, and the 1 damage trigger is really, really nice with Bo-Katan. It's just that she deploys a little bit later than you would really like to have a little bit more of an aggressive curve. She's solid. She's not terrible. She's not amazing. She definitely fits into the B tier. So a lot of people are curious about Bossk. Where would I put Bossk here? Well, to be honest, I'm going to start off Bossk in the A tier, and I'm going to put both Bossk's lists in the A tier. That's going to be Bossk Green and Bossk Blue. Bossk Blue really did get some cool things like Perilous Position, did get Equalized even as an off aspect partially. You did get some other options as well, which is really cool for Bossk. Bossk Green, you know, just solid in general. The ability to kind of do that Bounty Hunter's Quarry option for you with cycling in and potentially double claiming that, getting an early deploy does function really well, especially when you're fighting against things like, for example, Django, which we'll talk about a good amount, but also even in things like Anakin, when you're just trying to avoid these like tempo style plays or things that could trade really high value into you. Playing bounties and getting your value from actually killing your opponent's units is really good, and Bossk Green does that well, and of course Bossk Blue does that potentially even better because all you're trying to do is kill your opponent's units. But I do think this is a list where I has some upward mobility, potentially could be entering S tier, because the early to flip, the bounty claiming, the bounties placing, the little damage triggers everywhere is really good. It's just a matter of, you're going to need to know the meta a little bit more before we see a hard control list, I think, really come into its own with set 3. Next up, we got 3 Cad Bane lists here. We got Cad Bane Green, Blue, and Red. So Cad Bane Red is kind of interesting, but it very much falls under the same Boba Red / Django Red lists, which I think Cad Bane actually just finds to be, or is found to be a little bit weaker than those. So it's definitely gonna be like a low B tier or high C tier for Cad Bane Red. As for Cad Bane Blue, kind of a similar scenario where I think there are better options, but also Cad Bane Blue, just kind of a weaker soft control list in the villainy space. Much prefer things like Bossk if you're going to go that controlling route, or even in some cases a little bit more of an aggressive proactive strategy in like literally playing aggression, vigilance, villainy. Cad Bane Green, on the other hand, I think is a quite strong list. This is a little bit more interesting to me because this is kind of the successor of Boba Green. Jango Red is the successor for Boba Red. Cad Bane Green is the successor for Boba Green. And then, of course, with Boba Yellow, I think you kind of have like this Asajj Yellow / some other options that you could go with. And Cad Bane Green is just solid, right? Lots of value plays, lots of damage triggers everywhere, and overall does some pretty good work. Next one up, we got Cassian Yellow, guys. We're going to put Cassian in the D tier. He's not quite lull tier. His stats are very weak for a 6 to deploy leader. He does have Saboteur, which, you know, okay, sure, you could do maybe something with that. But honestly, it's more just about like his overall abilities and his benefits, I suppose you could say, don't really fit what you want to be doing. Like this aspect of drawing additional cards throughout the game ends by the time you flip Cassian. Like you're not going to be getting to that point very frequently. And if you're against a control deck, well, he doesn't have enough power to actually fight through that in order to get to the late game and actually succeed in that portion. So there's just nothing really going for him. It's just not that he is exceptionally bad to where he is lull tier, but so far D tier, I think, is fitting for him. Next up, we got Chewie, and I think with the addition of Obi-Wan as well as Yoda, you kind of have this late game powerhouse / sentinel options for you in vigilance, heroism, to where Chewie Green is going to be a D tier. One of the, I guess you could say, redeeming factors of Chewie was the fact that he was this 2/9 sentinel that you can bring down. But now we have one earlier deploy with way higher power and a more relevant ability in Obi-Wan, even though I don't think Obi-Wan's very good, as well as a late game win con leader in Yoda, which I think both fit kind of this like option that Chewie maybe could have had, even though it wasn't even good to begin with. He's just going to be a D tier, guys. Not that great at all. Next up, we got Chirrut Red, and I know some people were maybe considering Chirrut Yellow on the list. Guys, I've tried Chirrut Yellow. I still don't really like Chirrut Yellow as much. I think Chirrut Red is going to be the better list. Although you could definitely argue that Chirrut Yellow is worthy of this list, considering we have, well, some duplicates of leaders that maybe not so good. But I think Chirrut Red is definitely a C tier list at this point. You didn't really get that much from playing Chirrut, right? One of the things that you wanted to do with Chirrut was that you get him down, he's a guaranteed force unit on 5, but you just have so many force units which fulfill that force synergy. And then you also have leaders that have that Jedi and force tag, which is extremely relevant, which I think actually made Chirrut a lot weaker. Add to the fact that he's just so understated compared to some other options that we have, as well as his ability not even being that relevant because things like takedown still take him down, which is an extremely prevalent meta card. So Chirrut's going to be a C tier for me. Really not that impressed with him. All right, everyone, those Fennec enjoyers, get out your pitchforks. She's going in the lull tier, guys. She is bad. 5 to deploy, 4 stat line, gets absolutely destroyed by so many different things. Her ambush ability just doesn't do anything. It's just so it's so weak comparatively to what you could be doing. Like if you wanted to play a cutting heroism leader, guys, we have the addition of Quinlan Vos nowadays. Like, why are we not just playing Quinlan over this absolute poop that is Fennec Shand? She's bad, okay? I know a lot of people think she's a little bit better. She is lull tier, okay, for me. please, if you're a Fennec enjoyer, let me know in the comments section down below. Let me know how infuriated this made you. But she's in lull tier. And to be honest, Finn Green is not much better. I'm going to give him the D tier because I do think he has something at least cool going for him. Does have some interesting synergies that actually can do work. It's just that it's such a pie in the sky type thing where it's not going to happen basically ever. The whole idea of like recycling shields and experience with like Rose Tico or like Maz Kanata or Inspiring Mentor can be kind of cool. Overall, though, not a strong ability, reasonable stat line in terms of leader deploy, so maybe that pushes him ahead of Cassian. But overall, a pretty weak leader in of himself, and Finn Green is kind of the only option that you got because of those synergies that I mentioned, like Maz Kanata and Inspiring Mentor, but overall, just pretty weak. Now, I know some people are extremely excited about Gar Saxon because some people were saying like he is absurdly good after I did my last leader tier list. But with this deck tier list, we actually got 3 different Gar Saxon loadouts. And that is because we actually saw a couple of these Gar Saxons from set 2. I think the most impressive one to me was the Gar Saxon Yellow. The only thing is you didn't really get a whole lot from Gar Saxon or for Gar Saxon from set 3. I have played a little bit with now. There are 2 of them, which is kind of a fun thing to be doing with, you know, some of the things that you wanted to play anyways, like Crafty Smuggler, Dr. Evazan, and things like that, Mercenary Gunship even. Gar Saxon Double Blue, I think, got like Equalize, still pretty weak, and Gar Saxon Green is just... It's just mediocre, maybe even a D tier here. Some people were trying to mess around with like the Darksaber and ramping into Gar Saxon, placing Darksaber on and going to town. And granted, you don't need to play green to play Darksaber in the deck because he is a Mandalorian. But I do think Gar Saxon Yellow has the most potential and is still pretty solid. Again, just getting natural buffs on your units overall is pretty good if you're playing shielded units and things like that. But she didn't really get much from set 3. Just a couple like events. And if you wanted to, like some other random units that are just solid on their own. Next one up is Moff Gideon. This one's Moff Gideon Red. I really, really wish that we could have gotten just a little bit more power out of this ability from Moff Gideon. One of the biggest problems with this guy is his whole thing is you use these real cheap units to get a little bit extra power, but then it doesn't help you actually end the game any quicker. It just gives you a little bit more value. Doesn't really fit his playstyle in terms of what the result is. I would have loved to see like +1 and +0 and overwhelm on the action with Moff Gideon. I think it could have got him really, really a nice boost. But for now, he's going to end up in C tier. Just not really much going for him, to be honest. Next up, we got to talk about an absolute banger, and that is OG Han. I'm actually going to put both archetypes near the top of the list. We got Han Yellow in S tier and Han Green in the low to mid portion of A tier. Now, we saw Double Yellow Han actually make a top 8 of the set 3 tournament. I don't think it was an extremely popular deck to bring necessarily. I think a lot of people were really on that Jango hype train. I think a Double Yellow Han has a really good matchup into Jango Red with things like Millennium Falcon, Azatug Gunship, and things like that. But also just in general, this list is just all about tempoing out really solid plays and getting advantage on board in terms of extra resources, because you can play more expensive things than your opponent can. And of course, the Han Solo 7 turn still exists. We got the new Enfys Nest that actually is pretty good in this list. We also have things like Clear the Field, which is really, really solid, and a few other things that end up being really, really solid in this Double Yellow Han list. But I just think that in general, everything that was strong about your Double Yellow Han is still strong. And in some cases, it actually has some better matchups because of things like Boba Fett being gone. Han Green, on the other hand, still solid. Not necessarily as solid as Double Yellow Han. You still get access to the Tech DJ combo, as Tech makes it so that DJ is still that just single cunning. So that's still very, very strong. And honestly, that's the best thing about Han, or Han Green rather, is that you can do things like turn 1 resupply into turn 2, Tech, turn 3, you know, go ahead and get your DJ down, which is really, really awesome, but with a little bit less actions than, you know, Double Yellow Han can do. But overall, still both very good and some of the best lists that you could be running in the meta right now. Next one up, we got Hera, and Hera's going into the lol tier, guys. Hera's, it's just bad. Okay, we got one new card in Hera's deck, which is the Sabine Wren unit, which does have that Spectre tag. And it is a good unit. I'll give her that, right? 4 cost, 4/4, can't be attack, which is, it's solid, okay? Still Hera, still absolutely atrocious flip, really doing nothing. Leader ability doesn't do anything except allow you to play some of these cards, which some of them are pretty mediocre, like Ghost, and heck, even in Sabine Wren's case, that's just like a solid unit. you don't really have like this cohesive strategy by putting all the Spectre cards in your deck, just don't play Hera. Okay, just don't. There's Hera Red. I put Hera Red here because I think the best thing you do is just ignore the Spectre things and then just play like a green-red heroism deck and then just do better with that. But there's also like some people are playing double green Hera, so you can take advantage of like command and then play the Spectre synergies. It's all mediocre, to be honest. It's just not a great deck. Next up is Hondo, one of my favorite decks from set 2 in terms of just enjoyable gameplay. Playing with that second hand is always fun. We got Hondo Blue and Hondo Yellow. Now Hondo Yellow, it really just it never shaped up. Honestly, I should probably just remove this from the list because it's D tier. It's definitely just a D tier. It's just not good. The biggest thing with Hondo Yellow was, okay, there are a lot of really solid yellow smuggle options, but you don't really want to be doing that with this type of color combination. It's just a little bit too slow for the value you get. However, the blue variant ended up being, well, reasonably solid. It was like low B tier, high C tier list. Back in set 2, I would have put it like maybe mid to high B tier. It was a solid soft control list where you kind of get some extra value playing with a secondary hand. It can be quite good against some of the slower decks because you get so much value out of smuggling, but outside of that, it can struggle against especially the hyper aggressive deck. So gonna be a C tier for Hondo. All right, everyone, here's Hunter. He's gonna go below Boba. Boba's banned, and I think Hunter is worse than Boba, and Boba's literally unplayable, like literally unplayable. This guy paying resource to like inadvertently draw a card, but drawing like a repeat of a unique unit only if you have this unique. It's so convoluted. It is even more convoluted than someone like Padme, who I also, no secret, don't like. But Hunter is arguably just the absolute worst leader in the entire game. Honestly, anyone in the LOL tier is just has options for that. But Hunter, man, it doesn't matter what you play. Basically, you're playing a deck with just the color and aspect combination. So in terms of Hunter Red being some sort of solid deck, never gonna happen. Iden's next up, and quite the favorite from set 1 for sure. I still find Iden to be quite underwhelming. Deploying a little bit too late, just the healing isn't enough to really be proactive and counteract your opponent's strategy. So I'm going to give Iden Blue like a solid B tier. It's not terrible by any means, but it's not strong by any means either. Iden Green, I think, has gotten significantly worse, and honestly, I would probably put it like bottom B tier, maybe even a high C tier. In fact, I am just going to drop it in the high C tier. These like value-oriented green vigilance villainy options, you just have so many better ones these days. So really just don't find Iden to be the place to be when you're trying to do that strategy. But she is a reasonable hard control leader, which is why double blue is a little bit stronger, but still not too impressive and hasn't been for a little while. One of these days, we're going to get IG to really pop off, but unfortunately nowadays he is not quite. I'm gonna have to put IG Green in the D tier. I've tried a couple of different versions, double red IG more recently because of the Mr. Bones from set 3. Still not good at all. One of the big things about these 4 toughness leaders, and I know people will say, look, what about Kylo or like Asajj or these types of leaders? The crucial part is that they deploy a turn early, and it's so early on in the game that not just removal spells, but also units can't kill them at that point. When you start to deploy on 5 resources, your 4 resource plays are very frequently able to just kill these 4 toughness leaders, and it makes it very, very difficult to actually get any value. On top of that, the front side action from IG is also really tricky, and also IG got just a lot worse even after being not that great, because a lot of the things that you want to do is rush the board with a bunch of units. And that includes a bunch of 1 toughness units, and 1 toughness units got a lot weaker when things like P38 exist in the meta now. Grand Inquisitor. So I think Grand Inquisitor dealing damage to himself and requiring all these different actions has gotten significantly weaker with how the meta has started to shape up. The doing a bunch of actions, trying to set up these big attacks and do these things where you can actually get value from Grand Inquisitor has gotten harder and harder to do. And for that reason, I think he's gotten a decent amount weaker. Now, I don't quite view him as like horrible, horrible leader. I think Grand Inquisitor Blue is stronger than Grand Inquisitor Yellow, but I actually will put Grand Inquisitor Yellow in the D tier at this point. There's too many Tarkin towns running around, which just completely hoses the Grand Inquisitor strategy in just Tarkin towning a unit that maybe you spent a lot of resources on, but you're also dealing damage to it as well. But it's not even necessarily paying like cheaper costs like New Han, for example. It's just about getting in that attack. So you're being this aggressive, but then you have this horrible stat leader when he does deploy. You just need too many actions, too many things that need to go right in order for Grand Inquisitor to really see a lot of power. There could be some crazy things that you can do with him, and he does curve out nicely. It's just a matter of if you find yourself against like Cad Banes or Jangos or anything like that, it is just atrociously bad for you. Jabba the Hutt, one of my more interesting leaders from set 2. I've really enjoyed Jabba, to be honest, but unfortunately, he suffers from a lot of similar problems that Grand Inquisitor does, which is just there's just way too many actions in what you're trying to do, and everything that you're trying to do is very telegraphed. And so Jabba Red, quite a bit weaker, at least in my opinion, than Jabba Yellow. The problem with Jabba Red is that the bonuses that you get from being in aggression, like Chrysanthemum and Jango Fett, for example, you need to be setting up the bounties, and then you need to be able to get an attack in with it, and that's just too much work. Jabba Yellow, on the other hand, you can just kind of get a bounty out and then get some value from it by playing certain units. So I think what I'll have to do is put Jabba Yellow probably somewhere around like middle of B tier, somewhere around here in this area. It's still a reasonably solid deck. You still have this really powerful leader. You can still ramp into things and do all this thing. And you still get things like a Reputable Hunter on turn 1, which is a 3-4 on turn 1 in some cases, or even like Hunter the Haxion Brood, a 4-3 shielded. Like, these are strong plays, no doubt. It's just that because of the action requirements from Jabba, it can be a little bit tricky to pull off consistently and be good all the time. Heck, I mean, you still even have like Jabba the Hutt plus Dryden Voss, which is a really, really sweet kind of 2-card combo. Heck, that even gets better if you are playing Cad Bane in the deck in some cases, because then maybe you have a secondary capture option. So still some cool tools with Jabba, but not exactly extremely powerful. Jyn Erso Red, very similar to Cassian in terms of deck style, but gonna be a D tier as well. A leader ability that only really functions when you're on the offense, as well as attacking your opponent's units, as well as having profitable trades to go ahead and do so. Way too many requirements, way too many things can go wrong for that, and you really don't get that big of a payoff. There's very, very few occasions where you'll go ahead and use the Jyn action and you'll get like, oh, my unit survives and your unit dies. That's about as best as you can get, but even that is probably not good enough because your leader deploys for 6 resources and doesn't actually give you this massive bump when she comes down. So gonna be a D tier for me. I find it kind of interesting as we have seen a lot of like double blue Iden, but only just the Krennic green, really. No one's really dove into the Krennic double blue by any means, but I actually find this list very comparable to Iden green, as we saw from set 1. Still very similar lists. These leaders kind of do very similar things, but the units that you're using and everything just kind of gets a little bit better with Krennic. And also the leader is so much more powerful when he does come down, so much better in terms of actually providing your opponent with something that they can't just ignore and actually have to take down. I actually really do like this deck. I think it's a solid B tier. Not amazing or insane by any means. You can still run the classic vigilance, villainy, command style cards, and it has a really nice shell around it. So it's a solid deck, but nothing too crazy to write home about. Next up, we got some Kylo Rens, which is kind of interesting. At the end of set 2, we got to see Kylo Yellow actually pop up in those planetary qualifiers quite a bit. We also got Kylo Green and Kylo Double Red. So Kylo Green, I think, is an easy one. I would actually just put Kylo Green in like D tier. I don't think that this deck is very good at all. The Kylo Green strategies oftentimes revolve around trying to play this like aggressive mid-range strategy, and it's just splitting up your kind of plan too much to the point where it just doesn't pay you off in any way. Double Red Kylo fits the plan. It's a solid deck. I want to put it in like the middle, to higher end of C tier. It's not amazing. It falls to a lot of different things, and it got a lot worse with set 3 because you have so many different toughness units, and there's so many things just completely hose those units. Shielded units, big old sentinels coming down. It's really hard to get under things and get in real quickly. Kylo yellow is actually quite solid. I'm about to put it kind of closer to the higher end of B tier. I'm not really sure where this is going to pop up yet, but got a lot of things from set 3 in terms of value upgrades, and more importantly, like now there are 2 of them is pretty strong because it can get you 2 cards out of your hand for a massive turn to play, which is really, really good with Kylo since it kind of guarantees someone to maybe discard cards too, which can be pretty interesting. Unmasking the Conspiracy can be really good, especially if you're already playing things like MiGs. It actually did get a decent amount better. I'm excited to see if we can see Kylo yellow pop up here and there a little bit more. And also you get Petronaki Arena, which is something that I think Kylo really does benefit from. Heck, if you do with that Fallen Lightsaber, not trick or anything, but like the idea of playing Fallen Lightsaber on Kylo when he comes down, if you do have that empty hand with Petronaki Arena, he suddenly becomes a 9-powered attacker immediately. That is pretty crazy, okay? And that gets really crazy really quickly. All right, next up we got Lando. Guys, lol tier, just trash, okay? I've played like Lando red, Lando double yellow. I've tried to make this guy work. I really just haven't found a place for him anywhere. Of course, the double yellow cunning heroism shell is good. So if you play this double yellow Lando deck, it's in some cases going to win a game, but any deck can really do that, and it's not because of Lando or anything in association with this deck. It's just the fact that you're playing cunning Millennium Falcons and things like that. This idea of cheating out on smuggle costs. We got 0 new smuggle cards from set 3, so it literally just ended up getting, well, for the most part, worse, and it wasn't good to begin with. Lando, not great. If he had like an extra power on his, front side or his back side in terms of stats, maybe something could have happened there, but a 2-5 coming down just isn't enough to put pressure on like something like Sabine. Even if he does come down early, you can't really use the leader action. And in fact, some cases when people do use that leader action, it backfires and suddenly you're down a resource and you really got nothing from it. If there were some more cards like the Millennium Falcon that fit kind of exactly what Lando wants to do rather in the future, maybe, but not right now at all. Next up, we got Leia. I think Leia has actually gotten a decent chunk worse here from set 3. Previously, I probably would have put him like middle B tier or so, but I think she kind of ends up in the bottom of B tier at this point. It's kind of unfortunate because I love me some Leia. That was the deck I first built in paper. I still have like 7 copies of 4 Cause and like 8 copies of K2 and Red 3 from the drafts and boxes. And then, of course, I bought the playset when I first started playing. But we didn't get anything from set 3. We got Jyn Erso, which is good in Leia. Don't get me wrong. I'm playing the full 3 of in Leia Red when I'm playing, this deck, and I'm playing the Jyn Ersos. But I think the bigger problem for this one, and this is something that I've come up across a lot, is the fact that if you're going to be playing all these rebels, you really, really lose out on a lot of different things. For one of the big strengths of like Sabine Green, for example, doesn't even rely on its rebels in Poe Dameron and Wrecker, and in some cases Darksaber, none of which kind of fit Leia's theme. You don't have ECL to run alongside it. There's a lot of things that go poorly for Leia. And then on top of that, the only benefit that you get from running Leia is that you're able to cheat on actions, which can be really tricky to do if your opponent's constantly exhausting your units, killing them, or getting control over the board, which tends to happen even more so in set 3. Next up, we got some Lukes, and Luke's pretty interesting because we actually did see some Luke pop up recently, but I really don't think he's gotten all that much better necessarily. It's just that Luke has always been kind of that solid mid-range leader, and I would actually drop him up at like the top of B tier. I've always thought he's just kind of that middle of the pack solid leader. You're always going to do reasonably well with him, and of course things like, well, the new random force units coming in, maybe getting some more force synergy going, which can be pretty nice. You do get like Kiadi Mundi in the deck if you want to, things like that. But to be honest, realistically, it's just always been a reasonable deck. Luke Red, on the other hand, I think got significantly worse to the point where I would actually just put it straight up in the D tier. one of the reasons why Luke Red was on this list in the first place, because it's kind of an alternative to like the Chirrut Reds and the Rey Reds that were popping up, because it was that force-based deck. But nowadays, if I was going to play this strategy, I would 100%. I already thought Rey Red was better, but Rey Red's better. Anakin is better, which are two leaders in of themselves, but also I would prefer just kind of running other decks in general, like aggression-based decks. Heck, even things like Ahsoka Tana, which isn't really within this strategy or what things that you want to be doing necessarily, over Luke, to go with that direction. At least you really want to stay within that mid-range value plan that Luke's pretty good at. Mandalorian up next, and my goodness, am I not impressed with Mandalorian. I was pretty excited about this guy. Just that combination of forcing you to play upgrades, not just playing units with upgrades to exhaust your opponent's units, is just significantly weaker, to the point where I would probably put him honestly pretty low into the D tier. I don't really find any other combination of Mandalorian to be solid. Like, you can play double yellow, but then, like, yes, you get double yellow cards, which is kind of nice, but then you don't get any of the really solid upgrades that Vigilance has access to in some cases. So, to be honest, Mandalorian, if you just had the ability to exhaust units when units came down with upgrades, I would probably be putting you in the B tier. But because you have to play this combination to get value out of Mandalorian, definitely a D tier. We got Boba Fett. This is Boba 2, the newer Boba Fett, up on the list here. And I actually think he got a decent amount better from set 3. You have things like Yularen that just fit perfectly with Boba Fett, because it kind of fits in the curve so perfectly, to where other units like Modded Cohort get a lot better. But in general, any, keyword additions to the sets, to the card pool, makes Boba Fett just a little bit more interesting. And also, with the Boba Fett's armor, you got Boba Fett as your leader if you wanted to go like Boba Yellow, which could be kind of interesting. But in general, there's just some powerful keyworded units in set 3 that do seem to fit perfectly within Boba Fett. And again, Yularen is like a perfect example of a unit that, suddenly he's got a keyword, which is awesome with the restore. Suddenly getting all these heroism unit buffs is really sweet to keep things like Modded Cohort from dying immediately to a 4-powered unit. It's just so many different cool things, little small things that just make him just a little bit better. Not much, but still just a little bit. Next up, we've got ourselves another banger, and that's going to be New Han. Now, this one's a little bit tricky, honestly. This one I had to think about quite a bit when I was not just going through, but looking at the leaders as we've been going through. And I still find that both Han Blue and Han Green to be exceptional decks. And now we haven't seen too much of them yet, so we will have to wait and see if New Han really comes back and people start playing him again. I would have to say he's probably one of the more boring options for some people out there, so maybe that's why we haven't seen him. But I would definitely put like Han Blue into the A tier. I would put Han Green into the A tier. And honestly, I would put him near the top of the A tier. Both of them are exceptional. Han Red is a decent chunk worse, to where I would probably put him somewhere around the top of B tier. Still a good deck. It's just that it doesn't really fit perfectly with New Han's synergies, in that you want a bunch of different unit selections that you can really either curve out and do all these crazy things and rush your opponent down like you can in green, or in Han Blue's case, you get to go ahead and kind of value plan your way through the entire game. Kind of crazy that we got 4 Hans in A and S tier, but they're good decks. What can I say? Next up, we got OG Palpatine, and I gotta say that now because of the new Flip Palp, but OG Palp is a very interesting deck. He is still the, by far, most powerful late game leader in the game. What I mean by that is you just get such a massive payoff when you do get to those 8 resources in stealing a damaged unit, that he always seemingly will have a little bit of viability here and there. And we even saw Palp Yellow but get some top 8 spots in some recent tournaments. That said, I believe it was the same person who ended up getting those top spots, and it was not necessarily that the deck was extremely insane. It was more of the pilot is just really familiar. it did get some cool things like Cad Bane, for example, in Palp Yellow. I do think it's a powerful deck. I would definitely put it in like A tier. It's definitely an option that you can use to really get some good work in. Palp Green, on the other hand, I would actually put closer to the bottom of A tier, maybe even like a high B tier right now. I just think the uber ramping strategy is really tough to actually get a ton of value out of, because there are situations where you can like be permanently exhausted. There's more removal options. There's more ways to attack your hand, and there's just more ways to even aggro you down. So I think Palp Green has gotten a little bit weaker, although it did get some new tools in like Masamida, for example, Ponga the Lesser, which is kind of cool. We'll see if it ends up improving as we go forward in the set 3. Next up, we got Qira Green, and this is one of those leaders slash decks that I was really on the lookout for. I mentioned this in my leader tier list, but I put Qira pretty high up there. I wasn't quite sure if she was going to be like the master of meta that a lot of people had her out to be, but she was a very, very good and by far one of our stronger soft control lists, if not the strongest soft control list, because I would consider Bossk the hard control option. Qira Green just comes down, so much value in all the things that you get to play, and gets you some really cool synergy pieces, especially with the shield token coming down. So it's gonna be a high A tier for me. It's really, really solid. We even saw it pop up here in some top spots recently. So Qira Green makes a lot of sense to be higher up on the list, and it's just really good. Next up, we got Rey, and this one I think is a little bit interesting. Maybe this is a little bit of a hot take, but I actually think Rey has really, really situated itself very well in the meta. I think the more sets that we get with random cards, like for example, Anakin's Interceptor, not really like an insane card by any means, but suddenly in Rey, it looks more appealing because, you know, maybe you can get an extra experience token on it, get you a little versatility going. Any unit that's like these really cheap but like low base stats units, suddenly you look at Rey and you're like, dang, can I make that even better? Yes, you can. But more specifically, I think Tarkin Town is an extremely valuable base right now. Of course, it was always rated as like that second best base, but it feels like it's gotten even more valuable, and the distance between ECL and Tarkin Town isn't as much as it was before. But also, well, the Force synergy just seemed to get a lot stronger because you have more options within that category nowadays. So I kind of want to put it in S tier. I don't feel like I should. I'm going to put it high A tier. Let me know if you all disagree with this one. Maybe it's a little bit of a hot take, but in terms of just how this deck plays out, the higher value units throughout the curve is just really, really good. But it's important to note that you're getting higher value units out of your cheap units. It's not like you're all in on these expensive units. You're like splitting them up amongst a bunch of cheap units, which is exactly what you want to be doing in the meta right now. As for Rey Green and Rey Yellow, I think these are significantly weaker than the Rey Red, but still actually quite solid decks. And I would put them both into the B tier. And we're starting a second row here. I think, let me swap these around. Whoops, I grabbed the wrong ones. But I think Rey Yellow is actually a decent chunk stronger than Rey Green. You get the new R2. You can even play the now there are two of them with some of the combos in that one, which is kind of fun and strong. But then in Rey Green, you get a lot of that restore, which can really help you against aggro decks and just kind of getting you value to get you to Rey, you know, ramp a little bit and things like that. So all of Rey has been pretty nice, and Rey Red by far the strongest. But now we're going to talk about Sabine, and guys, I think everyone was expecting this. Sabine Green going into the S tier. It's just a really tough deck to really maneuver around. I think as far as ECL is going to exist in the game, I think Sabine's going to have this really, really strong option, because the real strength behind Sabine is ECL, which is one of the reasons why Sabine Green has almost always made it into the S tier. The other two have kind of been on like the A tier side of things, and it's because they don't have access to ECL. The ECL Podameron and Wrecker give you some really nice mid-game power plays, but then you have this early to deploy leader that can just smack in for so much damage, as well as having a really nice slew of really early aggressive plays to get in a bunch of damage, and that makes Sabine very, very strong. As for the other two, we have Sabine Yellow and Sabine Red. I think Sabine Red is a decent deck. I would probably put it in like the A tier. It's still good. Sabine still has that same core of going with that Rebel synergies, getting in a bunch of damage. Ray or Sabine Yellow, I think is better than Sabine Red here. Sabine Yellow, you get access to Petronaki Arena. And again, the early to deploy leaders, getting that extra power, I've said this before, is exceptionally massive, because you essentially get an additional turn or maybe even 2 turns in some cases with that extra power, which can matter, especially in a deck that's looking to be aggressive. And also, I think that with Sabine Yellow, you do get access to some really nice heroism, cunning units that does do well against some of the space decks that are pretty popular right now. So overall, Sabine, very strong still an S tier. Now, as we've been talking about all the different decks on the list, I actually did not necessarily add any set 1 or set 2 leader new archetypes, with the exception being one new archetype for Tarkin, which is Tarkin Blue. Don't really feel like anyone's created or shown anything super amazing with set 1 and set 2 different leader archetypes, but Tarkin Blue has actually popped up here and there. And I think the main reason for that is that he just gives you a lot of value while being like this soft control option, which is really nice. And of course, you get some nice things in Vigilance Villainy. Who knew? Tarkin Yellow, on the other hand, I think got a lot worse with set 3. I'm actually gonna have to put him in like the middle of B tier. One of the big things with Tarkin Yellow is that it felt like this tempo space oriented deck. And unfortunately, so many people are now in tune with space and are building for space. So you can't really kind of cheese out some games there. And then on top of that, the other space decks that you are going to be fighting against tend to be a lot stronger, right? Django Red is the quintessential example. But even, random decks, again, like Ray, for example, that have all these space units that are pumping them up, because they're trying to deal with things like Django, suddenly they're kind of space decks in themselves if they are preparing to fight you, which is really tricky. So Tarkin Yellow are going to go on into the B tier in the middle to low portions, but Tarkin Blue going to be at the higher end of B tier. I think it's actually a really strong deck, and just getting that experience token, very similar to Ray, just ends up being pretty valuable throughout the game. Next up, we got Thrawn, and Thrawn, very similar to Dr. Aphra in terms of what deck you're trying to build, but Thrawn has the, dynamic of being able to exhaust enemy units to stall out the game, whereas Aphra is single-mindedly going ahead and doing that. I'm going to cycle through my deck, get to the best cards, and beat those control matchups. So I think Thrawn actually, in most cases, will be a little bit better against the aggro decks, but I would actually put it a little bit lower on the list into the D tier, because I don't think it has that weird niche use against some of the more hard controlling archetypes that Dr. Aphra does. So very similar decks. Aphra does deploy a turn earlier than Thrawn, which can be pretty useful against aggro. So I'm not actually sure if even that's the case with Thrawn being a little bit better against aggro with set 3. But one thing's for sure, and that is it's not good regardless. We're arguing over C and D tier. It's just this exhausting thing. You need to be able to have some way to catch up. And unfortunately, by the time you can, it's too late oftentimes. Next up, we got Darth Vader. One of my all-time favorite lists in Vader Blue. Just had a lot of fun playing it in set 1. Obviously, I haven't really returned to it, at least in paper, since then, because it's not been that great, and I still think that trend continues. I think the place you want to focus in on is Vader Green, because you kind of get this nice mix of getting a strong kind of mid-range leader, but then you also get the command villainy, which is pretty strong as well to begin with, that you can ramp into. So it's actually a pretty strong mid-range deck. I would definitely put it somewhere at like the top end of B tier for Darth Vader Green, and then somewhere at the bottom end of B tier for Darth Vader Blue. Both are decent lists. But Vader Blue, I think, suffers from just deploying way too late in a field that really wants you to deploy sooner. Even if you are playing a control deck, you need to be able to survive. And that's why something like Bossk has really outshone Vader's, because he deploys so early and gets you value way earlier than Vader can in most cases. But then we end up into our set 3 leaders. The first one being Nala Se. I know a lot of people were excited about it. Honestly, the best place I've seen for Nala Se is a double blue list, and that is because you can potentially leverage this ignore aspect penalty on clone units. But I'm gonna be honest, guys, she's not good. Like, I'm putting her straight into the D tier. Double blue, I see Nala green, I've seen Nala red. It doesn't matter. This idea of trying to mash in clones, get this heal going and things like that, There might be a list, okay? I'm not going to count out any set 3 leader right now because there is something that could surprise me. But in terms of the ability to get some value out of your leader, I just don't think Nala Se is it, and I've been extremely unimpressed with her. Next up, we got Obi-Wan. And I know a lot of people love some Obi-Wan. Honestly, Obi-Wan, pretty weak. I'm gonna have to put him in the C tier. The only really amazing thing that I have enjoyed about Obi-Wan is his actual flip, you know, that sentinel plus this ability to kind of maybe move some damage around, healing and pinging things is actually kind of nice. But most of the time he gets one shot. He comes down and then someone ECLs a wrecker, and not only do you use your Obi-Wan die, but then you also take 6 damage and the wrecker lives, which is really not good. So the sentinel body in most cases, especially in set 3, the space kind of just bypasses it with a lot of different decks. So it's better than like the Chewie, as I mentioned earlier, and you can do some cool things, but still not past the C tier. Nute Gunray's next up, and Nute Gunray, really kind of mediocre leader. I'm gonna have to put him at the bottom of C tier. One of the big things with Nute Gunray is that there's too many moving parts. The whole idea behind Nute Gunray is to generate a lot of these bodies and then get advantage from them in one way or another, and generally that's going to be exploit. Problem with that is that exploit in a deck that's trying to like kind of return some of that value that you use to exploit is just way too weak to things that really deal with exploit well, like waylay, spare the target, things like that. And then of course their units can just kind of kill off your battle droid tokens, and then your battle droid tokens just get killed off by random pings, and just too many things going on with Nute Gunray that work poorly in his favor. He deploys late, doesn't have a high power, gets you some more battle droids, but that only reinforces your dependence on this go wide strategy. And with exploit, it's just not that great. Yoda's up next, and definitely one of my more favorite leaders from set 3, and just in terms of how it plays out. We got Yoda green, Yoda blue, and Yoda yellow. Now, we actually saw Yoda yellow pop up in one of the top 8 tournaments, but I actually find all 3 of these decks to be pretty solid. Yoda yellow, in terms of just explosiveness, definitely has the edge, because what the thing that Yoda yellow can do is that just have some of these most one-sided games you've ever seen, where you do things like turn 1 something, turn 2, now there are 2 of them, turn 3, you to attack, kill something, maybe set up a You're My Only Hope, and suddenly you're playing like a bunch of resource cost reductions throughout the entire game. It's just really obnoxious, okay? So I think for that reason, I'm going to put Yoda yellow in like A tier. It's just a strong deck. Yoda blue and Yoda green, I think, are just a little bit weaker than Yoda yellow, but they're very different strategies. Again, Yoda yellow is on this game plan of like, oh, I'm going to get so much value in the early game, and that's going to give me kind of the momentum to reach my Yoda flip, kill something, and get some value back. Yoda green kind of just ramps you straight there, which is pretty strong. I'm actually going to put this kind of around the Darth Vader spots. I think they kind of represent very similar ideas, just on opposite sides of the, I guess you'd say, Force. And then Yoda blue, this one I think is going to take some time. Yoda blue is pretty strong. You do get access to some really nice control pieces, vigilance, equalize, things like that, but it is a control deck at the end of the day, and that's going to cause it to really take some time to figure out its place in the meta. So at least right now, I don't see many people going to be playing Yoda blue, but maybe in the future we'll be in a spot where, okay, I'm going to do my deck to where I got the this mana removal for this thing, and maybe that can work out for you a little bit better. Because I know when I first dove into Yoda blue, I was playing way more Fell the Dragons, because that was something that was way more useful in set 2, and then I quickly realized that takedowns are by far the more important removal spell to be playing in a full playset. So things like that are going to be changing your perspective on any control decks, including things like Bossk and Iden and Yoda. Next up, we got Count Dooku, probably the best the best exploit option that you got with set 3. I know we talk about Nute Gunray, or maybe if you want to go with like Palpatine or things like that, but Dooku just kind of allows you to actually take advantage of the cost cheating by cheating out things that shouldn't have been cheated out, which is the whole idea behind exploit, right? So Dooku blue, Dooku red. Dooku red gets you access to Count Dooku the unit, which I think is one of the best exploits. But Count Dooku blue gives you access to more setup and, things like Malevolence, which can be pretty good. It really depends on what deck you're fighting. I think the biggest problem is that cunning as an aspect ends up being one of the strongest aspects, if not the strongest aspect in the game. And that means that Waylay is in high prevalence. So I wouldn't be able to push Dooku past like a B tier, to be honest. I think Dooku Blue is just a little bit stronger. The big thing is you do get access to the big exploit cards, but also with Dooku Blue, you get access to things like Devastating Gunship, which I think is very strong in the meta. You get access to basically any Separatist unit that is cheaper, but because Dooku is Dooku, you can exploit them out using his action. Dooku Red, on the other hand, still good, less setup. Aggression tends to be a little bit more aggressively focused, where I think Dooku Blue tends to be a little bit more controlling, which is exactly where you want to be. I think Dooku Reds ends up being somewhere around the low B tier. Probably worse, or probably worse than Leia, to be honest, but still reasonable. Next up, we got Wat Red. Now, I've actually had some pretty good results, but honestly, I haven't really been able to play him all that much, so I wouldn't be comfortable putting him past like a middle to low B tier. It's one of those decks where he's a little bit gimmicky, where you just drop all these units on the battlefield, you try to end the game really quickly, but he can do some really cool things, like, you know, pump up things for 4 additional power when he does flip by giving the +2/+2, then flipping, then giving another +2/+2. And that can be pretty valuable just by erasing standards. And I think that's the best way to be playing him, is trying to go for this, like, go wide, erase people down, and not worry about getting these value trades in. But overall, has been pretty solid, just not insane, so I can't put him past like that B tier level. Next up, we got Double Green Rex, which is by far everyone's favorite Rex deck. And I know people love the video I posted the other day, and I know that I had an amazing amount of fun, but guys, I just can't put him past the C tier, okay? I still can't. He's absurd with Akbar. He works really well with that kind of combination. Here's the problem. If your opponent knows anything's coming, they should be able to really mess up with your strategy. And that's the big thing. If you're talking about sitting down at a competitive table, your opponent's going to kind of know what is expected of your deck, and you're just not going to be able to do the things that normally you find that double green Rexes are doing. Not to mention, he is very weak to space strategies, because Akbar, Synchronized Strike only are based off the units in that arena. And guess what? All of them are ground units for the most part, and that can be extremely weak. So I'm sorry. Can't go past the C tier, even though I really want to. Oh boy. Another leader here in Padme that's gonna go beneath Boba. Guys, Padme and Hunter do like the exact same trash thing, where they have this, I'm gonna draw a card, but I gotta use all these different things and set them up such in a specific way where even if they just drew me a card, it wouldn't be worth it. But now it's super not worth it because it doesn't even happen. The only thing that Padme has going for her, and honestly, this might just be enough to push her out of the lull tier, even though I'm going to put her in the lull tier just because it's just, the rest of it is just so bad. But she's 5 to deploy. She's a 2/7 with Restore 1. Like that's actually reasonable. Okay. It's a lot weaker than Restore 2. Okay. But Restore 1 does do some work. And honestly, just because of that, I think she should go somewhere around like the middle of D tier. I want to put him in lull tier because she's trash, okay? Don't play her. Even though she has one of the cooler showcases, in my opinion. Still don't play her. Next up, we got Maul Green specifically. And I know a lot of people were excited about this guy. I haven't found him to be exceptionally powerful. He does do the thing where, you know, you can get him down. You get to go Overwhelming Barrage on Maul, hit for a bunch because he comes down as such a powerful leader. But he comes down late, like 6 to deploy 6/6 isn't necessarily insane stats, it's just high power, right? And then the front side of giving overwhelm to things only works really well with specific units, like Darth Maul himself, and even then it can be a little bit risky. Overall, I've just found this deck is very susceptible to a lot of those space strategies, and it's also just a little bit too long to really get down and get your feet under you against strategies like Double Yellow Han and Sabine Green, things like that. So I wouldn't be comfortable with putting him past like a low B tier, to be honest. Maybe even a C tier, but it's just too much work for not a big enough payoff in Maul. Next up, we got Pre-Viszla, and honestly, this deck's cool. just for the fact that he is really the only leader that I've been happy with playing Shadow Collective Camp. And the reason that is you drop Viszla, you draw a card off of him, pretty sweet, you know, more likely to get to that 6 power. If you do get to a 6 power leader on turn 4 instead of turn 5 with Maul, for example, that is a major difference and can completely swing the game. So that's pretty cool. Also can work with some Mandalorians, but I won't be able to put him past like a C tier. He's interesting. He's got some cool stuff going for him. But honestly, we didn't even speak about his front side action because I don't think it's that great at all. It's really all about that flip side where you get to draw some cards afterwards and maybe pump up Viszla. Pretty sweet. Ahsoka Tano's up next. We got 2 different variations. We got Ahsoka Yellow and Ahsoka Green. So Ahsoka Green, very similar to Sabine Green in that you're running the ECL. You kind of get this aggressive leader. She does actually have some really nice potential here because if you do have a couple of units on the battlefield, you get this really strong leader and you still get the ECL and the whole package, right? Here's the problem. I guess you say fail case is significantly worse for Ahsoka than it is for something like a Sabine. Let's say your goal was to be able to get that coordinate going in both decks. Okay, if you get the coordinate going, yes, Ahsoka has some potential to be better than Sabine in some cases. But then when you don't get that coordinate going, Ahsoka's front side action does nothing, and her flip side is just a 3/6, which is the same power that Sabine's really attacking for, and she comes down a turn early. Okay, so if you're not able to get that coordinate active, Ahsoka's significantly weaker, which is one of the reasons why I don't think she can be anywhere near the S or A tier, but I wouldn't be averse to be putting her in like a bottom of the B tier. Instead, I actually prefer Ahsoka Yellow over Ahsoka Green because she has a little bit of a different dynamic to her. You actually have more options. You get the space arena a little bit more with cartel turncoat, things like that. But also you get Petronaki Arena, which is also quite nice as it turns you into a 6/6 in some cases, which can be kind of cool. And overall, I just found it to be easier to get coordinate active in Cunning than Command. By far, my favorite leader overall from set 3, Anakin, is up next. And he's a banger, guys. I've just been impressed with Anakin in general. I am going to go out on a limb here, and I'm just going to stake my claim right now. We saw multiple Anakins coming in on recent tournaments. I've been really impressed with Anakin as well. The only question is as to whether or not Anakin Blue will be the savior. I'm going to drop Anakin Blue in the S tier. I mentioned this in my leader tier list. I really want to put Anakin in the S tier. I just felt like he was that strong when I was playing him. And to be honest, I think he has a really couple of good answers to some of the space strategies. He's a really nice payoff when you are taking a bunch of damage and can outrace because of that, which is really nice. There are different variations of him as well, not just the Anakin Blue, which has some restore and some controlling elements, which is awesome. But you also get things like Anakin Red, which can really double down on the aggressive side of things, and Anakin Yellow, which is a little bit of this combo-oriented version and can do some good stuff there. I think all of these decks are actually quite solid, and I have to put, I think Anakin Yellow is a little bit more one tricky than Anakin Red, so I'll put him in the B tier, and then I'll put Anakin Red at like the far end of A tier, because I do think that Anakin as a leader is just extremely strong, and I do think his placement can shift drastically depending on what you're really fighting against. And I do think, based on what we're seeing right now, the double red of going like twice the pride and like going hyper aggressive can be really weak if you're getting exhausted or if your opponent can outrace you, which can happen right now. And then Anakin Yellow, again, is that combo oriented strategy that can be really easily disrupted, especially with Tarkin Town being in the meta. You can kind of kill your turn 1 unit, which can be pretty rough. So that's going to be Anakin. Mace Windu is next up, and I'm going to be honest, guys. I do not like Mace Windu. I do not think this guy's good at all. This like dealing damage to damage or units for a resource, and then him to flipping on 7 resources. I saw someone saying like, oh yeah, Mace Windu's lightsaber, godly card once you get it on Mace Windu. It's not. You get +2/+2, and you get to draw 2 cards. It's really not that great. This, to me, D tier. Mace Windu Blue has been the most exciting for me. A little bit of soft control tendencies, a little bit of cool things you can do there, stalling up the game and all that, but just not a strong leader, not a strong reason to be playing him, and overall pretty weak. Next, we got Asajj, and I've been absolutely loving Asajj. I got 2 different variations. We got Asajj Red and Asajj Double Yellow. So Asajj Red, very much similar to some of the other space-based decks, the things that are kind of taking over from Boba Red. But the thing with Asajj is that you kind of get this early to deploy leader, which can help you control the ground a little bit. But because Asajj Red is more akin to the space strategy, her coming down oftentimes dies immediately because you have very little presence in the ground arena. And as such, I've been less impressed with Asajj Red. Still a solid deck, probably put it somewhere around the B tier. Again, still solid. Asajj Yellow, on the other hand, I'm gonna have to drop in the A tier. I think that this deck is still very, very solid and can do some really, really good work. It's just a matter of what are you really fighting? And if that's going to be a deck that can really get in some early ground pressure and pressure your Asajj quickly, or if your opponent's playing a ton of like open fires or things like that, Asajj can get a little bit weaker. But if maybe they're going all space, you can absolutely outrace them in some cases. And of course, double cunning allows you to play cunning, which ends up being pretty good. And you still get that standard villainy cunning shell that Boba was so good at. Next up, we've got General Grievous. Honestly, I have not really found too much success with General Grievous. And really, I haven't even tested double yellow General Grievous myself. It's just a matter of I've seen a lot of other people trying to make Grievous work, and usually they gravitate towards this double yellow variant. Don't think there's anything really too special with General Grievous himself. Just kind of playing that double cunning villainy shell that many decks are good at. And heck, we even have another one to talk about after General Grievous. But I don't really see anything too great about General Grievous himself. So I'm going to have to go to put him in the C tier. There's not enough droids. When he does come down, it's a little bit slow because of 6 resources, especially in like a cunning villainy deck. Just not too many exciting things going on for him. All right, next up, we've got Jango Fett. And guys, let's not waste any time. We got to put Jango Fett in the S tier. I do think he's better than Anakin Blue, but I'm not sure if he's actually one of a deck that's better than like Sabine Green and Han Yellow at the current moment. And definitely a deck to watch. Same with Anakin Blue, to be honest. These are kind of very, very early impressions with set 3. But Jango Red, there's, again, a few different ways that I've seen Jango Red. One is the space strategy. That's by far the more common one, where you're really leveraging a bunch of space units and being able to tempo out your opponent's ground units by exhausting them and Tarkin touting them away, which can be extremely powerful to dominate the early game. And then the other version is more of just kind of playing at a standard tempo-oriented, cunning aggression Tarkin Town list. But then you get to kind of leverage Jango's ability just a little bit more with things like Holdout Blaster, Fifth Brother, and things like that. Overall, very, very good. Double Yellow Jango, on the other hand, I think is a decent amount worse. And that is mainly because you have a lot less really just synergy within the kind of double cunning part of things with Jango Fett, right? Things like Ruthless Raider, things like Kylo's tie if you're going with the space strategy. It just seems like to be more things that work better with Jango, specifically in aggression. But if you're going to play double yellow Jango, you absolutely could, and you still get things like P38. You could still kind of go with that space strategy, although you have way less hits, and you still get Fett's Fire Spray in both these decks, which is a lot better. Again, one of the things about this tier list is that if there's a leader that kind of does something a little bit better than you in a similar category, well, suddenly you get a little bit weaker, and that would have been Boba Fett in most cases. So he got a lot better because Boba Fett's no longer available. Going to go ahead and put him in the A tier. Double yellow and S tier for Jango Red. Next up, we got Darth Sidious, or Emperor or Chancellor Palpatine. Palpatine from set 3. This is one of those lists where I think it's going to take some time to really curate what you want to be doing with Palpatine. It's also going to be something that's a little bit tricky in terms of a lot of things can mess with your Palpatine strategy, and that can really throw you off if your opponent knows what they're doing, especially since you don't have a leader flip. You need to be getting value from Emperor Palpatine, And right now, I don't think that's very easy to do. So I'm gonna have to put him kind of like the middle to low B tier, which is a little bit unfortunate. And the best version I've seen really has been that cunning vigilance, getting you the control elements. One of the big changes I think that's really important to be running in Darth Sidious / Emperor Palpatine or Chancellor Palpatine is really something that's going to allow you to defeat your own units, so you can kind of choose when you're able to flip Palpatine, and that's something that's really, really important. Giving you that agency helps a lot. And last but certainly not least, we've got Quinlan Vos. Now I got Quinlan Green and Quinlan Red. Quinlan Green by far was the one that showed up more at some of these tournaments. Quinlan Red kind of just reinforces that Tarkin Town early game domination plan with Quinlan's, a little bit of damage here and there. I think the biggest thing about Quinlan is not his front side action. It's about flipping him and then just constantly getting this real big value train, especially with 5 to flip leaders, and then you having things like Plo Koon coming down. It can hit for 7, and that can be massively impactful as well, you don't actually need to play ECL, which is really, really good. So I've actually been more impressed with Quinlan Green than I have with Quinlan Red. Not insanely impressed, but I definitely think it's going to be on the radar in terms of getting some value and maybe being a solid deck overall. I think it would be a disservice to be putting him any lower than like a low A tier, because I do think it has potential, and we have seen it have potential in some of the terms that we were running. As for Quinlan Red, I've seen significantly weaker results with this one. I've played it a lot myself, because I was kind of in the mind of, okay, Tarkin Town, maybe we can see some things happen in there, but I've just much preferred the kind of command shell over the aggression shell. And of course, again, you get the 30 HP base, which you actually kind of want in Quinlan, so you can actually get more value from his flip side. But that's going to wrap up all of the leaders. Let's talk about the list here in closing. Nice little bell curve here, and that's not necessarily what I was shooting for, but of course, in this situation, it is something that might be appealing. We do have very few S tier lists. I think that's mainly because of Boba Fett being banned. There's some really good ones, like these are the ones to beat, and then there's just a bunch of really solid ones, which is why the A tier is also quite large. We do have quite a few leaders in kind of like the don't play category in CNT, but we have a large majority of them in that B tier category, where all of these lists seem very viable and very, well, they have potential to take some things down. So I think the meta has opened up this middle part of the tier list a lot more since Boba Fett has been banned. Again, we have 4 decks in S tier. If I were to make this list at the end of set 2, 3 of the 4 lists that would have been in S tier, let's say, would have been Boba Fett's. Would have been Boba Green, Boba Yellow, and Boba Red. That's insane, right? So the meta has definitely shifted, and it's nice to see 2 different set 3 decks up in S tier. I think you can even argue that Rey Red and New Han should be in S tier as well, which would mean that we have 2 set 1, 2 set 3, and 2 set 2 leaders in S tier / archetypes / decks in S tier, which is pretty sweet. But of course, I know I snuffed someone here. I know someone's going to be mad about some placement on the list. Let me know in the comment section down below which one I got wrong and why, and which list I left off, right? Because we didn't talk about every single leader with every single color combination. We just talked about the ones that, well, either from experience or from what we've seen in tournaments has kind of shown up and actually done some work. But overall, thanks for watching, everyone. This was a long video and took probably, well, as you might have noticed in halfway through the video, a shirt change. So it took me a couple days to kind of go out and record this. So if you did enjoy it, well, hopefully you'll be back, subscribe, and I'll see you all tomorrow.